Let me show you step by step how I went about creating my own alphabet. It's an alphabet that's based on runes, and I have had so much fun with this. The alphabet is for a story that I used to call my Demon Girl story. I have now renamed it Rune of an Unknown God. It's still just a working title. The magic system of this world, which I'm going to talk about more in a different video, has an aspect to it that is based around writing symbols or carving symbols. And since the culture and society that I am sort of basing this world on, basing the story on, is inspired by the ancient Nordics, I decided that runes make a lot of sense. So that's what I did. And the first question I asked myself, and that you might also want to ask, is why create a new rune alphabet? There are alphabets in our world. There have been a bunch of different rune alphabets, so why don't I just use the Futhark or some other rune alphabet? Especially since I have said before that I don't create my own languages, I don't create new languages, so why create a new alphabet? So the language of this world, or of this country where the story takes place, is Swedish. I'm not writing it in Swedish, but the language that I think of them speaking is Swedish, and modern Swedish, because why complicate things needlessly? So I could use the rune alphabet that we used here, or one of them, but I have a couple of reasons why I didn't want to do that. One of them is that alphabet is heavily influenced not only by our language, but also by our culture. For example, we have at least one rune there that is pretty strongly associated with one of the ancient Nordic gods, and I don't have the ancient Nordic gods or exactly our culture in this story. So yeah, that just didn't feel quite right, and I also didn't want to take the exact alphabet and just replace some of the meanings. Now, of course, some of the runes that I have created look exactly like runes we used here, and that's sort of inevitable because there are only so many things you can do with runes, given that you can have vertical or diagonal lines, and that's basically it. And if you don't want to add too many lines, there are only so many options. I decided that I wanted to go with a new alphabet. I wanted to create something new, and I decided that I wanted to have 23 runes, and that was completely random. I wanted an odd number because that felt right, and then I just went with 23. With that decided, the first step was to create the meanings. And I went with the meanings first and not the runes, because the primary use of runes in this world is magic, and so the meaning and symbolism of the runes, it made sense to have them first and then do everything else later. So each rune has at least one meaning. Many of them have two, because the culture sort of views two concepts that we think are different as the same thing, or at least two aspects of the same thing, and so then they got more than one meaning there. And I came up with the meanings by looking at alphabets, rune alphabets specifically, that we've had in our world, both, the actual ancient ones and some newer rune magic and things like that, and also looking, of course, at my world and concepts that are important in this world. The meanings that I came up with are as follows. It is healing, fertility, success, strength and courage, protection and safety, sickness, death, travel and time, wisdom, war and peace, justice, home and family, ice, fire, happiness and tranquility, sorrow, destiny, gift, togetherness, need, forest, animal, and day and night. With those meanings in mind, I went on to give each of the runes a name. Bear in mind, I still didn't have the runes, but I wanted to attach a name to each rune, because runes in our world, they had a name. It wasn't just a letter, and I felt that was important. I also felt that I know that sometimes in the story I'm going to want to have the characters talk about specific runes and what they do or how they're going to use them, and then it made sense to me that they have names and not just a letter, because I felt like that would be easier to understand as a reader if there was a name and not just a letter. I don't know if that's true, but it makes sense to me. Now, how I went about naming them is that I went to Google Translate. I picked 3 languages, Finnish, Scottish Gaelic, and Icelandic, on top of Swedish, and then I just typed in the meaning of the rune and got the meaning in each of these languages, and then I also typed in 1 or 2 other words that had something to do with these meanings. For example, for healing, I also typed in the word scar, and for ice, I typed in snow and winter, and for need, I typed in desire and wish, and so on. The reason I picked these languages, by the way, is that Icelandic is the most Old Norse sounding language that I know of, and Finnish and Scottish Gaelic are just 2 really cool languages, and I wanted to see if I could add them in. So now that I had a bunch of words, I just sort of mashed them together to create a name for the rune. And in some cases, I took like the first couple letters of one word and the last couple letters from another and the middle ones from another, and then did that. Sometimes that didn't really work out, so I just sort of took a letter here and there until I had a meaning. And I made sure that all of these names are pronounceable in Swedish, since that is the language I think they speak in this world. And I also Googled them to make sure that they don't mean anything offensive in any other language. And as far as I know, they don't mean anything offensive. I'm going to read the names to you and also put them up on the screen, so if you do see something that you know means something offensive in any language, please let me know. So here are the names, and I am going to pronounce them in Swedish, so they might sound weird to you, but this is what they're supposed to sound like. So we have Arkna, Hoxe, Grasta, Vakur, Vergi, Samti, Bala, Ard, Glitas, Trita, Avik, Shinetas, Tumit, Elpir, Symast, Tarn, Ikvet, Juti, Myla, Tosir, Mutsor, Disin, and Siv. I feel like I didn't quite pronounce all of them exactly the way I imagined, but something like that. And now, with the names and meanings done, it was time to actually design the runes themselves. I made a couple of decisions about the designs pretty early on. One of them was that every rune was going to have a vertical line, and the reason for that was that that vertical line was going to represent the world tree in this culture. I made one exception to that, and that is Tomit, the ice rune. That did not get the vertical line because it is associated with ice, or it means ice, and ice is bad. Ice is associated with demons, and demons are sort of not worthy of having any association at all with the world tree. I also made the decision that no rune was going to be the mirror image of another rune. Mirrors are important in this culture, and they're sort of viewed as you see the truth in a mirror. And so I didn't want one rune to be the mirror image of the other rune, because then that would be the true version of that rune, sort of. And yeah, I just decided that it was easier to make sure that that didn't happen. And of course, no horizontal lines, because that's just how runes work. They don't have horizontal lines. So what I did was that I drew a bunch of runes, just came up with all the different ways I could on how 2 to 5 lines could be combined to create a rune. I didn't want any more than 5 lines because that would make it too complicated. There are runes with more than 5 lines in this culture, in this world, but they're not part of this alphabet. I'm going to talk about that more in another video where I talk about either the religion or the magic system of this world. So don't forget to subscribe so you get to see that video. When I had all of these designs, I just picked 23 of them that I liked, that I thought looked good. And I came up with these. And now, of course, it's time to match the rune with the meaning and the name. What I did there was that I made flashcards of each rune, and then I put them in order, sort of similarity to each other, and also tried to get the simplest ones, the ones with the fewest lines, at the top of the pile. After that, I went through each name and meaning in order, and I assigned a rune to them. Now, originally I thought that similar meanings would mean similar runes, but it ended up not quite being that way. I felt, first of all, that it would increase the risk of confusing them with each other. Plus, it felt a little bit too orderly, and it didn't feel like that would be organic enough. So instead I just went through the list of names and meanings, and I picked a rune. And I did it sort of in order. I looked at the first flashcard with a rune, and if I felt like they fit together, then I paired them up. And if I didn't feel like they fit together, I moved on to the next rune. That way I figured that the first runes of the alphabet would be the simplest ones, which I think makes sense if that is the order that they were created, which I don't know if they were, but maybe they were. In universe, I mean now. So I went a lot on feeling in this stage, but I did have some specific thoughts. And one of them, of course, is Tomit, ice, like I said, that I wanted that to be a rune without a vertical line, so that was pretty easy. Another one was Hoxe, which means fertility, and I didn't go with the first few possible runes there because I didn't want it to look like an erect reproductive organ, because that felt way too on the nose. There was also Tritha, which is War and Peace, where I wanted a symmetrical rune, because War and Peace are opposites but linked together, and so I just went with the most symmetrical rune that I could find. And then there's Elpir, which is fire, which could look a little bit like stylized campfire, like the diagonal lines could be flames. There is Mutsar, forest, which could be an upside down tree. There is Siv, which is day and night, which is a rune that's sort of pointing up towards the sky, where day and night is determined. So some of them have a little bit of reasoning behind them, but not all. And that I didn't like that because I feel like that is organic. Like I said before, it makes sense that you can't immediately tell that, oh yeah, that is why that rune has that meaning. Because they will have changed in universe. This is probably not the original way they were created. Both the runes themselves have changed and their meanings and names and things like that. So yeah, it felt like it was a pretty good solution. And I think this is a pretty good lesson for any world building, is that you don't need to have a full explanation as to this is exactly why this is the way it is. It's enough to have a little bit of explanation to some things, because then the audience is just gonna sort of assume that you know all the details behind everything else as well. Unless you're me and put it out on the internet that you don't know that. But yeah. I will also say that I'm not sharing every single detail in this video, because that would make the video way too long and probably kind of boring. If you're interested in a more complete breakdown of the runes and their meanings and my thought process and all of that, A, comment below and I might very well make more videos on it, and or B, join my Patreon, because one of the perks that I have on my Patreon is access to documents that go a little bit more in-depth into certain world-building things, and also for higher tiers, access to the world anvil for this particular world. So yeah, if you're interested in that and also want to support me and my channel, check out the link in the description. The next step in the alphabet is assigning each rune a letter. And it might sound weird that I'm doing this so late, but it sort of simulates how the rune alphabets came to be in our world, because they weren't alphabets at first. They came about at first as magical symbols, and so did this alphabet. It was first magic, and then when they felt like, oh, we need an alphabet, well, we have these runes, why not just use them? Not exactly how it happened, but you get the picture. The first thing I did here was figure out which letters should actually be in this alphabet, because again, I only had 23 runes, so some letters were gonna have to be cut. The first thing I did was that I went to the old Futharks, the real rune alphabets in our world, but I quickly realized that that didn't really make sense, because the alphabet that I was looking at was based on Old Norse and not modern Swedish, so it had certain sounds and letters that it just didn't really make sense for modern Swedish. So instead I took the modern Swedish alphabet, which has 28 letters, and I wrote them all down, and then I cut some of them. I just removed some that I figured these aren't necessary. Q, for example, and W, because they don't really correspond to an actual sound we have in the Swedish alphabet. I also removed G because I figured that K could sort of be used as a G. And in the end, when I had cut the letters that I figured these might not be necessary, I ended up having 23 letters left. So that was perfect. So I went through the runes and just sort of gave them a letter. And it made sense that Arkna was going to be A, because it starts with an A. Perfect. I did not, however, give Hoxe the letter H, because I wanted the first few letters to spell something pronounceable, and AH is not really a combination that works for that in Swedish. And I wanted something pronounceable because that is how many alphabets get their names. The Futhark, for example, the rune alphabet, is given that name because those are the first letters, the first runes in that alphabet. And the word alphabet, even in itself, comes from Alpha and Beta, which is the Greek alphabet. I am pretty sure. I will correct myself if I am wrong. So for Hoxe, I just picked another consonant at random, and it turned out to be R. Grasta got K because G doesn't exist. And then when I looked on, I realized that the next two runes, which are Vakur and Vergi, are both candidates for the letter V. And that meant that I was sort of spelling out the word arkiv. For those who don't know, the word arkiv in Swedish means archive, and I'm an archivist, so I thought that was really fun. So obviously I had to continue with that, so I gave Vakur Y and Vergi a V. Now the Swedish word arkiv is spelled with an I and not a Y, which makes a difference in how it's pronounced in Swedish, but I didn't want it to be too on the nose, so I decided to go with a Y there. So the first letters of this alphabet is A, R, K, Y, V, so it is named the arkiv. Or in English, I suppose it would be arkiv, arkiv. I don't know. How do you think you'd pronounce it? Anyway, it's super fun, not only because it's a nod to my being an archivist, but also because I feel like an archive is a place where knowledge is preserved, and you do that usually by writing it down using an alphabet. So, yeah, it really fell into place, and I'm really, really happy that it did. Anyway, after that I kept going, and I tried giving each rune a name or a letter that sort of made sense with its name, although I didn't do that completely because sometimes it didn't work, and sometimes I just felt like, well, maybe this rune or the name or the meaning or whatever has changed so that it used to make sense but doesn't quite anymore. Now there is a fun little detail here where Tomit was given the letter H. Tomit is ice, so it's the evil rune, so I was wondering if H is sort of a bad letter. Like, we have bad numbers, 13 in Western society, 4 in East Asia, and I was wondering if that could be a thing. Coincidentally, and I swear I did not plan this, Tomit is also the 13th rune, so maybe 13 is a bad number in this world too. I don't know. And I don't know if 13 and H are both going to be bad. I have 2 characters whose names begin with H, so that's going to be problematic. I could, of course, make that a thing, and I could make people comment on the fact that they have those names, or something like that. So it could work. I'm not sure what I'm going to do there. We'll see. So now I have 23 runes, each with a meaning, a name, and a letter, and now it's time to figure out the actual writing. How do you write this? What kind of punctuation do we have? How do you know if Grasta is supposed to be pronounced as a G or a K? That is a different video, so stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching, be safe, I will see you next time.